what inspiration we have gained from the first two panels. Let me just say on behalf of the Chicago Urban League, thank you for your inspiration, your insight, and some real tidbits. And I will tell you that from the advocacy panel, I am going to accept the challenge. One of the things that we understand the Chicago Urban League's role to be in our community as a convener. And as we talked about the need to create a Black agenda, we accept the mantle of bringing folks together so that we can, in fact, create that agenda. And so please stand by and look forward to that. You know, when we talk about creating an agenda, one of the things that has come out of the cries for social justice has been the need, in fact, the demand to see more Black folks in the C-suites and boardrooms of our corporations. Earlier, Ms. Lavelle talked about her work with Chase Bank, and we know that we've worked with a number of banks at the Chicago Urban League. You just saw a commercial, or at least a discussion about diversity from Connie Lindsay, who's one of our new board members. And so we understand the importance of making sure that our corporations are diverse in every way, not just from employees, but through leadership. And so as we start our last panel, I am excited that we have a very distinguished group of panelists to have that discussion, and they will be moderated by someone who is newly back to Chicago and who is moderating and doing this as one of his first community events, and that's Stefan Holt. And so please welcome Mr. Holt back home, and welcome these very able panelists as they have this discussion.
Excellent, thank you very much. I think this is, it's good to be back. Welcome, thank you so much. I'm glad to be here as part of this conversation. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Stefan Holt. I'm part of the team here at NBC5 Chicago, and I anchor our 4 p.m. and 10 p.m. newscasts with Marion Brooks and with Allison Rosati. As you mentioned, I just got back to Chicago after a few years working in New York at our NBC station there. I'm thrilled to be back at NBC5, thrilled to be back in my hometown with my family here. And I'm also thrilled to be here with you this afternoon and have what I think will be an insightful, inspiring, and fun conversation on this important topic. I just want to make sure this is working right here. I want to make sure that you can see me. Can everybody see me and hear me?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, perfect. We're good. Awesome. Technology is interesting in the year of the pandemic of 2020. I want to make sure it's all working. But as I mentioned, thrilled to be here with all of you. Just a little bit of what we're discussing today. Racial inequity is nothing new, but of course the historic events we've all witnessed here in 2020 have called certainly attention to the many ways that this inequity is built into the very structure of our institutions, both public and private. So how can structural racism be dismantled? And I think our panelists might suggest that work must include increasing diversity at the highest levels in our leadership, in our corporations, in our businesses. Diversity in C-suite leadership and on boards enables organizations to tap into that broad and comprehensive spectrum of experience and skills that are available to all of us. It can also add cultural competencies to lead to better customer relationships and greater opportunities for the employees who work for these organizations. Sadly, as we were getting ready for this, I was given these numbers that Chicago has quite a way to go. In 2018, just 8% of board directors and only 3% of C-suite executives at the city's top 50 publicly traded companies were Black. That number is up slightly from 2014. That's according to a report from Chicago United, but clearly a long way to go. And a common explanation that is heard from hiring managers is that there are not enough qualified Black professionals to fill top leadership roles. So let's address this today. Let's start talking about it. Our panelists include Carlos Cubia, who's the Senior Vice President and Global Chief Diversity Officer at Walgreens Boots Alliance. Carlos V. Garner is joining us as well, Senior Vice President and Head of Corporate Social Responsibility and Diversity and Inclusion at First Midwest Bank. And Maria C. Green, retired Senior Vice President and General Counsel at Ingersoll Rand, a board member at Tennant Company, Wisconsin Energy Group, and Little Fuse. We've got quite the panel assembled here today, and I'm going to ask each of you to just, in about 90 seconds, give an introduction. I'd like you to talk about the leadership position that you're in presently, and I'd love to know your career path. How did you get there? How did you get to where you are? And after that, I'll start asking some questions. Carlos, let's start with you.
All right, well, thanks, Steph, and welcome back to Chicago. Sure you're glad to be home. I am the global vice president, well, I guess now senior vice president at Walgreens Boots Alliance, and I have a global remit to drive diversity, equity, and inclusion across the entire enterprise, which is 27 countries, 400,000 associates, and just here in the United States, we have almost 10,000 Walgreens stores. So my job every single day is to make sure that we have a diverse and equitable and inclusive organization, and that it's embedded in all aspects of our business. So that's just a little bit. In terms of how did I get here into this role, I have been in healthcare and financial services my entire career, but I started as a, are you getting that same echo?
A little bit. I can hear just a little bit of an echo back there.
Let me see here. Let me try to turn down my background here. How about now?
There we go.
Better?
Sounds good.
Okay, so literally my career started as a vice president of sales. I didn't come up through HR, but I came up in sales, and I started in a market, in a Detroit market, where I had a very homogeneous sales force that was trying to sell to a very diverse audience, and we just was not hitting the mark. So to accelerate the story, I put together a program with my leadership team to diversify our sales team so that we could understand the market, understand the consumer, and to really build bridges to that community. And we increased our sales by 113% that first year. So that's how I got into it. It was a business practice. It wasn't diversity and inclusion. It was just, how do you do business better? Today we're calling it diversity and inclusion because we're focusing on certain groups. But at the end of the day, is how do you build better businesses? How do you build better connections? And how do you make a difference? So I'll pause there.
Great. Carlos, it's a great way to introduce and to talk about your path as well. Carlos, can we talk to you and introduce yourself and how you got to where you are today?
Sure. Thank you, Stefan. And good afternoon, everybody. I'd first like to thank the Urban League for inviting me to join this conversation. I also want to shout out Mavis Lang and the Impact Program. I am a proud member of cohort number 3, so a shout out to all of my fellows of cohort number 3, and I'm really, really delighted to be here. I am a Chicagoan, I'm a West Sider, and I've been in financial services my entire career. Recently made a move to First Midwest Bank to lead up corporate social responsibility, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And my pathway there has spanned almost 30 years. I was on the business side of banking for quite some time, focusing on clients in private wealth management, in commercial lending. And what I found in those spaces is that I was a bit of a unicorn, one of a few females in those spaces, and certainly one of few Blacks in those spaces. So as I was working with clients, clients of color, particularly Black clients, gravitated toward me, and I found myself really working in community and trying to support communities of color, especially Black communities. So that led me to roles in the philanthropy side, where I supported diverse markets on the philanthropy side, and then ultimately into diversity, equity, and inclusion. So now at First Midwest, I am starting up this in a strategic way, and I'm really, really delighted to be here to share more about my work.
Interesting. This is going to be a great conversation here as well. Thank you very much, Carlos. Maria, can we talk to you about your introduction and how you got to where you are today?
Sure, Stefan. So Maria Green, I'm really delighted to be with you today. I've had the good fortune of being in the C-suite as the chief legal officer of 2 Fortune 200 companies, ITW, which is here in Chicago, and then most recently Ingersoll Rand, which is based in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I retired as chief legal officer from Ingersoll Rand in June of 2019. And as you mentioned, I'm currently on 3 public company boards. And so that's primarily what I'm doing in my retirement is serving on public company boards. My path, so I'm a lawyer by training, and I just, I had the good fortune of being in some legal roles. When I was practicing law before I became a general counsel, I was an M&A lawyer. So I did mergers and acquisitions. And I had the good fortune of being in an area that is critically important to most businesses, because most businesses want to grow either inorganically or organically through acquisitions. And so when I joined ITW, they were a $3 billion company. When I left in 2015, they were a $40 billion company. And that growth was primarily through acquisitions. And so frankly, my background in M&A was what was instrumental in giving me the ability to become general counsel and be in the C-suite.
I'm picking up on a lot of different paths to this, what essentially sounds like a similar role, is trying to increase diversity, trying to make our businesses, make our organizations more inclusive. I also get the sense that because all of you are where you are, that there is progress, there's signs of progress, but still a lot of work that needs to be done. I'm just going to open this up. What are some of the factors that you think might have limited opportunities, maybe not just for yourself, but for others who are trying to achieve more senior roles in these organizations?
Well, I'll jump in. So I think that from a corporate perspective, the most critically important thing, and I'm sure others have their points of view, but I think the most critically important thing is the tone at the top. What you need is a CEO who is committed to diversity. Because if you don't have that, if the tone is not set by the chief executive officer, then the company won't embrace it. And if you have a CEO who is committed to increasing diversity and having an inclusive culture, then you'll have things happen that will make that a part of the reality. You'll have, everybody knows that in corporate America, what gets rewarded gets done. So you need financial incentives so that managers are motivated and incented to bring in diverse candidates. You need programs that will promote diversity, within the company. And if you really have a leader who's committed to that, I think first and foremost, that's what gets you on the path to diversity.
Yeah, I would agree with that 100%. When I think about the barriers and the roadblocks, it's the lack of commitment. And the commitment, they say that the fish rots from the head down, right? If it doesn't work from the top and the top isn't pushing it, they're not committed to it, and they're not driving that accountability throughout the organization, then it's probably not going to get done. And I go back to as a sales leader. When I was a sales leader, I could not walk through my organization without my CEO or my COO asking me about the sales numbers. Are we going to hit our goals? And if you didn't hit the goals, you have to have a conversation around why you didn't hit them and what you're going to do differently. Well, translate that over to diversity, equity, and inclusion. If you're not hitting your goals and you're not making your numbers, who's holding you accountable? Who's coming back to you saying, why didn't you hit the goals? Why aren't you going to, what are you going to do to make that up next year? So that leadership accountability is so important in order to drive this. I don't care how good I think I am, or Maria thinks she is, or Corliss, well, not think, but we know we are. We can't do it alone if we don't have senior leadership backing and support. And we'll talk a little bit more about what's happening within our respective organizations. But if you don't have that accountability and that commitment, then it's just a figurehead role.
Yeah, I would say yes, and just add a couple of points. I know that when you talk to folks who are in the C-suite, a common theme that you will hear is that they did not make it there alone, right? They have support, they have advocacy. They have people of influence that open doors for them. They have a hype man or a hype woman that's in the room talking about them when they're not there, right? And far often, too many times, Black professionals don't have that same level of advocacy, that same level of sponsorship, or even that personal circle of influence that can open those doors for them. So I think that might be one limiting factor. Another one that comes up quite often is this notion of bias, and especially unconscious. You talk about those narratives and those images that we all consume. They color our views, they color our opinions, and ultimately can color our actions and our decisions. And those impacts may vary, they may be large or small, but those unconsciously biased decisions can also be very limiting for Black professionals. And then just call it as it is, sometimes there's conscious bias out there, right?
Yes.
And when that's combined with power structures, oftentimes it leads to inequitable outcomes.
Yeah, Stefan, the other thing I just want to say,
Sure.
when we think about, when you talk about that bias, we also think about folks that don't value differences.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not like them, then you have nothing of value to offer. So part of this role and this job is how do we get people to see and understand and to celebrate those differences and to really realize how they could impact your business in a very positive and productive way. So, you know, it's this role takes being almost an activist. You have to be an activist in this role because you have to continue to push, motivate, encourage, and drive people to your point of view. And this is one of those situations where you always say you want to respect the other point of view. But when we're talking about equity and equality, you can't give up on that. You have to bring people along to where you need them to be, because equity is one of those non-negotiable things, not just in corporate America, but in life. So I just wanted to add that piece.
I think it's interesting that you say the word activists, and because that seems to be a buzzword in 2020. We see people on the streets right now trying to be active in this election, calling for every vote to be counted, or in some cases for the voting to be stopped. But in terms of being an active participant in your organizations, give me an example. And Carlos, to start with you, since you raised the word activist, give me an example of how you've tried to implement some of these changes, of how you've advocated for more diversity within your organization.
Well, you know, so I've been in this role for about 3.5 years. And in this role, I saw a number of things that we could do better as an organization, right? I believe that you can celebrate what the company's doing well, but at the same time, you can hold your company accountable for what they're not doing well. So my activism was to celebrate what Walgreens has done well. They're in every community. We're 10 minutes from every American in the United States within a 10-minute drive. So we're out there and we're doing good things. But I'm saying, here are the things where we have gaps. So I would bring those things to the table. Representation at the highest level of our company was lacking. So let's go back to March, or once we lost George Floyd, with the murder of George Floyd. Let's call it what it was. He was murdered. At the murder of George Floyd, every company across the globe was struggling to try to figure out how do we address our employees and do this. Luckily, we had already been putting things in place before this, so we didn't have to scramble and start from scratch. We just had to amplify the work that we was already doing. So the activism was creating safe space to have uncomfortable conversations inside corporate America. We were talking about race at work, which is, oh no, that's taboo. You don't do that. We were already doing that. We went to the board and to our senior leadership and said, we don't have any Black board of directors on our board. We're Walgreen Boots Alliance. We touch every community in this world. We just recently named Valerie Jarrett last week to our board of directors. So it's pushing for the changes that need to happen within the company, getting to realize how it would be of value to the company, to the community, and to our employees. So when we go with the activism, if you will, we're talking about how it helps the broader organization and not just one group of individuals. Now, it was very deliberate. We wanted to target African Americans and Latinos, but we did it in a way that said it also helps the broader organization, the community, our patients, our customers at large. So those are just some of the ways that we push for change.
And if I can add to what you're saying, Carlos, I think we tend to lose sight sometimes of the fact that diversity is not a nice thing to do or the right thing to do. It's the thing that advances the agenda of the employees and the shareholders. And at the end of the day, if you're a public company, you exist to increase value for your shareholders. And there's data out there that we've all seen that companies that have diverse management and diverse boards perform better. They perform better financially, their results are better, their earnings per share is better. So I think we really need to continue along with the conversation of, we're not doing this because it's a nice to do. We're doing it because we're creating real value for the stakeholders in the company. And that's why we need to make sure that a diverse group of people have a seat at the table.
Absolutely. I'll just add, when I think about activism, more broadly, I think about it in terms of a sports analogy, right? Let's call a football game. Everyone on the field has a position to play, has a role to get to a win. And when I think about activism across the spectrum as it relates to racial equity, we have people who are protesting, we have people who are in corporate America, we have people who are in government, we have people who are on the nonprofit side. Everyone has a role to play. Speaking of corporate America, every company is also on one end of the journey or another. And for us at First Midwest, we're pretty early on. I just started this work here. The first role of its kind at the company, I'm the first person to sit in it. So building a lot of the structures to move us toward diversity, equity, and inclusion. But for us, that activism started with simple things like just elevating the dialogue around what is diversity, equity, and inclusion, and why is it important? And how does it link to business goals? How does it advance the business agenda? And how do we engage our employees in this conversation? We similarly, after the George Floyd murder, started having these conversations with our colleagues that we had never had before. So that is definitely a form of activism. And we have a long ways to go, but I'm really proud about where we've started this work.
It's amazing. It's so much. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. Go ahead.
I was just going to follow up on that, just in terms of, and I think Maria, you hit on this as well, that this is a value proposition for these organizations and for your companies as well, in terms of trying to expand the business. And essentially, this is something that helps. Having diverse cultural backgrounds, racial backgrounds helps to grow the business and increase that value. And we've seen so many organizations, especially this last year, make very bold commitments and bold statements, essentially standing for racial justice, which, Carlos, you were saying was kind of taboo for a while. Do you anticipate these public stands to continue in the future? How do we make sure this isn't just kind of a flash of the pan of 2020?
Is that for me?
I'll open it up to everyone. Carlos, if you want to go ahead and take it.
Oh, okay. But again, I go back to what I said, you got to hold your organization accountable. All of these companies made some pretty bold statements about what they were going to do. Everybody wrote a check, $1 million, $10 million. We've set aside all this money. Mm-hmm. The money's great, but the action is what's needed. We need real work, and we need, for folks to really stand up and do what they say, and then really understand what they're doing. I gave $1 million. I don't know what I'm giving it to, but here's $1 million. Go fix yourself. When you think about what corporations can do to really make a difference, you need to hold your company accountable. What we've done at Walgreens Boots Alliance, and I want to put it out there because I want to celebrate the wins, right? By bringing Valerie Jarrett on our board, we looked at our C-suite and said, you know what, we have opportunities within our C-suite. We've got to make a difference. We've taken on in the Chicago metropolitan area that healthcare disparities is huge, and it's killing our community. And as a healthcare company, we are committing to help to curb healthcare disparities on the South and West sides, and we're partnering with Mayor Lightfoot. So we're holding ourselves accountable by saying real action. We don't want to just put a $10 million check out there. We want to be impactful in the work that we're doing. So employers got to be held accountable. The C-suite's got to be held accountable. The media is holding us accountable because we've gotten a number of reports to say, okay, you made these commitments. It's 6-8 weeks later. What have you done since you made those commitments? And there's real progress that we're showing. Now, are some of these just statements? Unfortunately, yes. Some of these companies put it out there and they went back to business as usual. We're trying to create a movement and not a moment here where this lasts for a long period of time where the companies are really giving back. I mean, when you think about your business, We're a consumer-based company. If people don't come into Walgreens and buy our products and services, we don't exist. So we need to make sure that we're honoring those commitments to keep people coming back. We want the community through their dollars to hold us commitment. We want the media to hold us commitment. We want our employees to hold us to those commitments, and just making sure that you don't lose the movement to a moment.
Mm. Yeah, Carlos, you talked about that accountability. Where do you think that accountability comes from?
Oh,
Well,
and certainly.
Oh, you said, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Carlos.
Yeah.
Our names are so close together.
Similar, right?
We were on a call a couple of weeks ago when this happened.
Same thing, yes.
Absolutely. Yes, that accountability absolutely comes from the top, without question. I think leader presence, CEO commitment, not only in words but in actions, is so critically important to continue moving the dialogue. I think we're at a point in time at this country when you look at the pandemic and you look at the Amy Cooper in Central Park scenario, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and then George Floyd. These are moments that we just will never forget as a country. I think of it as like the 9/11 event. That is something you will never forget in this country. And because of that, things change. It's a catalyst for change. So my hope is that this moment, just as Carlos described, is not just a moment, that it is momentum, that is sustainable momentum. And with corporations coming together, CEOs coming together, being forced to really see what's happening in America, I think we might get some change here. I'm hopeful about that.
I want to bring Maria into the conversation here too, because I get the sense that boards can also play a role in this accountability and holding executives, holding their feet to the fire to make sure that they're implementing these changes. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. So I serve on 3 public company boards, so I think I can tell a story without attribution to any one of the 3. So around the time of the George Floyd incident, the CEO of one of the companies came to me and he said, we've made this statement about racial equity and standing with Black Lives Matter, but we really just don't know what to do to increase diversity in senior leadership, African Americans in senior leadership at the company. And I confess, Stefan, that initially I was like, you know what? That's what you have a chief human resources officer for. You have people to help you with that. Don't come to me with that. But then I said, but if they don't come to me, then it won't get done. So I said, okay, fine. If you want to increase diversity, make sure you have diverse slates. Every time you have a role, make sure you have at least 1 or 2 diverse candidates on that slate. Track how often the diverse candidate gets selected for the role. As I said earlier, reward your executives for hiring diverse people. You've got to put incentives in place and you've got to institutionalize these things. Hire, if you're hiring engineers, this is a company that has a lot of engineers. How about you go to the National Black Engineer Society and recruit? How about you go to the National Black MBA Society and recruit? Go to the places where the people that you're looking for are. And, this was all very novel to them. They were like, oh, gee, well, that's a great idea. Well, it doesn't take rocket science. It just takes a little bit of thought and a little bit of commitment. So it's day and age, a board member, however it gets done, it doesn't matter. And, so we need to make sure that they're looking in the right places, that they're hiring diverse people, and that once they get those people in there, they're doing the things that they can to make them feel included and part of the company so that they stay and so that they don't have huge attrition. So, we need to think about things that we can do to create an inclusive culture. But then at the end of the conversation, I said to the CEO, by the way, we're going to measure where we are today, and we're going to measure where we are in a year. And if there hasn't been any movement, I don't really feel like I'm adding any value as an African-American member of this board. So I'm going to think about resigning from the board. And he said, wait, what? That wasn't the outcome I was looking for. But at some point, you've got to say, either you're going to be accountable or not. And if you're looking to me to help you on that journey, that I've got to see the metrics increasing and improving. And if I don't see that, then I'm not adding any value. I'm just a figurehead, so I'm leaving the board. So I think sometimes we have to take a bold step and a bold position to make sure that people understand that we're not just there as figureheads, you know, to kind of be stood up and, you know, for people to see that they have an African-American board member, but that we really want to contribute to the conversation and help them move the needle.
It's interesting about tracking the metrics, because it seems something that's pretty simple at the end of the day. I mean, you already have the resources, you have the people in place to track all this information, to follow it. But you raised an interesting point. You know, the CEO is saying like, well, I don't know how to do this. I don't know what to do. It's almost like, and forgive me, I haven't been to business school, but it's like something, oh, we didn't learn how to do this. So I guess, are there any other examples of how executives are trying to change their leadership thoughts, the way they approach this, the way that they think and make these business decisions?
Yeah, we actually, the answer is yes. There's some companies that have put hard goals in place. Like what we've done, we put hard goals in place for our leaders. And so part of the bonus now, I think Maria talked, maybe Corliss, I'm not sure which one of the panelists said it, holding them accountable in their pocketbooks, right? Mm. People pay attention to the things they get paid on and the things they get measured on. So we now have a goal for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and it has several components to it. If we don't hit those goals, a portion of a bonus is at risk for the entire, every bonus eligible employee at the company, not just the leadership. So now this goal is on the entire organization to hit our numbers. You know, we implemented mandatory diverse slates. You can't even start the hiring process if you don't have a diverse slate. We have diverse interview panels. If you don't have a diverse panel assessing those candidates, you can't start the process. And then we've implemented a supplier and diversity goal to hit a certain dollar amount by this time next year. All of those things, in addition to hiring at the senior levels, are part of the goal now. Leaders have signed off on it. The board has approved it. We have that accountability across the top of the house, and the organization has said, we don't ever want to be in this position again. So let's figure out how to do this. So to Maria's point, we're measuring it, we're putting goals in place, and these are not rocket science ideas. These are simple things that you don't need a whole group of people to come together and figure out. They're simple things. You just have to commit to them.
Corliss, are you seeing that commitment to where you are?
I am, and as I mentioned, Stefan, we're pretty early on in the journey. I spent a lot of time with the CEO talking about how do we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion at the company. What is his role? What is the role of our executive management committee? What can we do to create a more inclusive culture? How do we engage our colleagues in this conversation? We recently held our employee engagement survey, and what are the opportunities that come out of that? What are our colleagues telling us that we can do better around diversity, equity, and inclusion? So for us, being at the very beginning of this journey, it is crafting that message from the top, having the company understand that this is a big focus of our work. In fact, my work is one of the organizational priorities, right, for 2021. So highlighting it to that enterprise level, I think is important, and it will drive that conversation throughout the company.
Interesting. I want to talk about it because I began with the introduction talking about how there has been progress in the area of diversity in a lot of these executive and board level positions, but there's still a lot of work to be done, especially here in the city of Chicago. Maria, let me start with you because I want to talk about, I guess, the perils of not taking this seriously. To an organization that isn't focusing on diversity and inclusion, what would you say to them? What would you recommend?
I guess I would say, you know, it really all goes back to it. Let's face it, in corporate America, it's all about the money, right? And I would say to them, you are not creating value, you're not maximizing value if you're not creating a diverse workforce and having a diverse board, because you need those diverse perspectives. And that is what is critically important. And the other thing that, that boards of directors of public companies are talking a lot about nowadays is something called ESG, which is environmental, sustainability, and governance. And all of the regulators, the Securities Exchange Commission, and everybody else is looking at how companies are handling ESG. So again, it's not a nice to have. If you want to satisfy your regulators and stay out of trouble with the government, you need to make sure that you have a robust governance program, that you have robust controls in place in terms of making sure that you're creating a diverse environment and you're sustaining that diverse environment. So you can really get sideways pretty quickly if you're not focused on those things. And, back to Carlos's point, there's so many little things that you can do that for whatever reasons, companies just don't think about. When it comes to making money, they can be very creative. But when it comes to creating a diverse environment, all of a sudden, everybody wants to throw up their hands and say, I don't know what to do. One of the companies that I was with when I was general counsel, every year we would have a discussion with the board about who were the diverse, high potential leaders in the company. And we would talk about, who were these leaders and what were we doing to bring them along and make sure they were successful. And at some point, I said, well, how about we have a separate session on diverse high potential leaders? Because, it's great that we're focusing on the people who are going to lead the business into the future, but somehow diversity doesn't get into that conversation. And frankly, if you have diverse leaders in the company, the things that they are going to need to be brought along are likely to be different than the other high potential leaders, simply because of the climate that we're in and the environment that they're in. So we started doing a separate high potential diverse leader session every year with the board of directors, and the board got really engaged. They started coming up with really great ideas about things that we could make sure that we could do to make sure we retained our diverse talent. So I think it's just really being intentional, as Carlos said, and being focused on it and thinking about it as something that won't be something that's nice to do, but something that's critical to do if you want the business to survive.
Yeah, I'll just add, I think we oftentimes approach the conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion in terms of what do you gain, but don't often talk about what you might lose, right? So Maria mentioned stakeholders that are so engaged and so interested in this work and are starting to hold companies accountable in a lot of different ways. One is employees, right? When we think about the younger generation of talent, this is top of mind for them. And if you're trying to take your company into the future with a strong workforce, if you are not a diverse and inclusive company, you do not have access to that good talent that's out there. Clients align their spending power with companies that represent their values. And that is becoming more and more increasingly important for clients as well, DE&I and CSR, ESG, as Maria described. Regulators, if you're in a regulated industry, your growth potential really depends upon how your regulators support you in that, right? And then your shareholders. Obviously, shareholders are why businesses, particularly public companies, exist, but they are holding companies' feet to the fire on these matters as well. So framing the conversation in terms of what you might lose if you don't focus on this is another way to think about it.
Interesting. Carlos, are you seeing the same thing with retaining talent and even trying to find talent, that there's this driver behind diversity and inclusion to get people who want to come work to your company?
Yeah, it's interesting what people are looking for now. The research folks are doing when they're looking to join a company. The first thing they're asking is, what's your diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy for your company? I mean,
they ask about it.
They ask about it, and then they'll challenge you. And I'm talking for some very, high mid-level positions and senior positions. This new generation and that the new workforce that we're all trying to attract, they're very intentional about where they bring their talent. And if you're not a company that can show them a real strategy that you're working hard to not only attract talent, but once you get that talent, to develop and nurture that talent and then move them up in the organization, they don't want anything to do with you. I don't care what the paycheck looks like that you offer them. Companies have no problems attracting diverse talent. They have a problem keeping it.
Mm.
When I've been here 3.5 years. I came here from Boston, 15 years in Boston. When I got to Boston, the first thing that the company did was connect me with an organization called the Partnership. The Partnership is an organization kind of like the Urban League there, but that fosters Black and Latino talent in that market to keep you there. And because they knew it wasn't a very diverse market. So here they are, I'm sitting there thinking, what do they have to do with the company? But they were nurturing this employee because they wanted to make sure that you had a good experience and that you stayed for a long period of time. I went to Boston kicking and screaming. I don't want to go to Boston. I heard it was a very racist place. I don't want to, but they made me feel good where it was hard to leave. That is what we need to do. We need to constantly recruit our employees. When I bring you on board, I don't want to just recruit you to get you in the door, but I'm recruiting you throughout your life, your employment experience, to make sure you have a good experience and you want to stay and tell your friends about us and other colleagues so that they want to come here. We want to have a brand that's diverse friendly and diverse intentional.
You've all made some incredible, I'm sorry, go ahead, Maria.
No, I'm sorry, just one quick thing. I was going to say that one thing I think we have to keep an eye on is there is more of a move towards recruiting diverse candidates. But I got a call from someone who was looking for a public company director, and he wanted an African-American male who had a background in environmental, who knew about regulatory, who knew about IT. He had a list that was like a page long. And I said, that person doesn't exist.
Doesn't exist.
So I think that I'm sure Carlos and Corliss, you see the exact same thing. When it comes to recruiting somebody diverse, the list of requirements gets a lot longer. And what we have to do is we have to challenge that. We have to say, look, if you were looking for a white male, would you really need all of these boxes to be checked? And unfortunately, I think it's incumbent on us to make sure that once they start looking for a diverse candidate, they're not looking for something that doesn't exist, and they're not looking for a list of requirements that will result in not being able to fill that role, because then they can default to, oh, well, I looked, but they're just no qualified candidates, right?
A lot of this circles back, I find, we talk about accountability and the onus on leadership of trying to actually take these really practical things that you can do, these metrics you can keep track of, and just this philosophy, and implement it to make sure that as an organization, it's top of mind in these decisions from hiring and retention to just how we practice as a business and operate. We have just literally 1 minute left, and I wanted to ask one final question to each of you, and as quick as possible, but just talking about a projection into the future. What do you think your roles, and what do you think our businesses are going to look like in the next 5 years when they take a focus on diversity and inclusion?
Well, I think if we actually do embed diversity and inclusion into how business is done, the same way we drive shareholder value, employee engagement, working with our customers, it's how we do business. If we actually embed it in that way, I think in 5 years, I'll still have a job. I don't think I'll be out of a job, but I think we will start to see some traction and see more Black people who are in those senior roles in the C-suite, and those folks can continue to open doors for others.
I would say I'm hopeful because this time it feels like people are really being intentional about accountability, and accountability is what will make the difference. So I think that we'll see the numbers move.
Yeah, and I'm just going to keep it real short and say I agree with what both of my panelists said here. I mean, I'm hopeful about the future. Accountability has got to be there, and I think we will see some change, but I don't anticipate that we're going to get rid of chief diversity officers anytime soon.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
No, that's great. But as you said, I think there's a sense of optimism, but still a lot of work that needs to be done. And I'm thankful after this conversation that I know that the three of you are handling this, that you're taking care of this, you're making an impact, you're being activists in your roles and in these organizations to try to make them more diverse and more inclusive workplaces. Thank you so much for being here and for joining us for this conversation. And thank all of you for who are attending and watching. I found this was fascinating and truly inspiring. I'd also like to thank the Chicago Urban League for putting this together, for taking point on these issues, and for inviting me to moderate this discussion. I have a newscast to go get ready for. I'm actually watching the results from Georgia and Arizona and Pennsylvania, and we'll see what happens here in the next couple hours. But just thank you so much for allowing me to be part of this. And I think Karen Freeman Wilson will be back in a moment to conclude today's program. Thank you very much.
All right, Stephan, keep the count going.
Keep counting. We got more numbers to count. We're going to be here a while.